and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Joy podcast. I'm your host, Ash Owen, and I cannot wait to find moments of joy with you today. Man, I am loving this week. I'm so encouraged. I'm so inspired by everything that Cam has been talking about. If you've been loving it, why don't you go and give us a 5-star written review? That way more people can find out about our everyday joy. You can do that over on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I cannot wait to dive into today's words to live by.
Don't just pretend to be good. Be done with dishonesty and jealousy and talking about others behind their backs. You can read that in the Bible from 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 1 from the TLB.
Cam, it has been so good to have you on the podcast this week.
I've loved it, mate.
I'm so glad. Giving us your sporty thoughts.
You know what? For a long time, I've been just secretly waiting for the invite to come onto the podcast. It was almost a one day I'll get
Cam's
the,
like,
hey Cam, do you want to come on the podcast? Hey Cam, do you reckon finally we could make this happen? And now we're here. I feel like I can tick it off my bucket list now.
Oh, that's so good. I'm glad. I know it's always funny asking people onto the podcast. I'm like, I know you have your whole show, but like if you want to come sit with me for a little bit, and particularly because if you don't know, if you're listening and you don't know, one of my other roles here at The Light is doing like digital content, and so it's very funny. Most of my time here has been not behind the mic, and it's been filming or listening or talking to people like yourself, Cam, but like on the other side of the room. Yeah. So I always find it really funny and slightly terrifying when I have you guys on, you know, like yourself or Lucy or anyone who works in radio on the other side of the mic, because it's a bit, I'm always like, oh my gosh, they're so good.
But you know what, just thinking about social media, which is obviously one of the big things that you do, this is one of the thoughts that I first had when I looked at this verse. Don't just pretend to be good.
Yeah.
I mean, how often on our social media, on our reels, on our stories, on any post, are we just putting up, hey, look how good I am.
Yeah.
Look at how awesome my life is.
Look at how fun this is.
Look at how amazing my life is. When it's not necessarily, sure, that's a moment in time. Absolutely. But it's like just looking at a speck of sand and going, look at the beach. It's like that's just a tiny, tiny part of it when really there's so much more that's going on. But don't just pretend to be good. You know that saying, fake it till you make it?
Yeah.
This verse is like the opposite.
Totally.
Don't just pretend to be good.
Yeah.
Like, don't fake it till you make it. There's a real call to be authentic and to have integrity and to be true to who we are.
Yeah, I think that is so true. I think when I see this, it really makes me think about how so often in this day and age, what people are looking for is that vulnerability, is that authenticity. I remember reading, there's like a stat, I can't remember where I read it, so this might be out of thin air, but there's this stat that was basically like, what are young people looking for the most? And it was community. Like that's like the main thing. And so I think when we live in this world where there's this inauthentic, in inverted commas, community, it's kind of like God saying, hey, don't just like be people who can like comment on a post and be like, wow, this is amazing, but then behind their back you're talking poorly of them, or you know, it even says dishonesty and jealousy and talking about others behind their back. Talking about jealousy for 2 seconds, social media is also such a deep rooted place of jealousy. And I'm going to be very honest for a second. Like I'm in a season of life where I'm organizing a wedding, I'm organizing a honeymoon, I've moved into a house, and I have had to do some heart work to really bring God into everything that I have, everything I'm doing, because it is so easy. I'll give a great example. Seeing people buy a house that are my age, right?
Yeah.
It is so easy. And I'll be honest, there have been moments where people have been like, yeah, we just bought a house. And I've been like, it's like this gut-wrenching disappointment comes into my soul. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish that that's where I was. And I think that actually doing the heart work to prepare yourself to be like, okay, God, whatever you have for me in this season, whether it's this or that, I'm actually going to not be jealous, going to not talk poorly, not allow my personal disappointments to get into other people thriving and doing well and all these things. And I think, because how easy is it to just go, oh my gosh, I'm so happy for you, this is the best. It's kind of like posting that perfect picture on Instagram.
It is. Yeah.
But then behind closed doors, you are like distraught and jealous and disappointed. And I'm not saying that you can't be disappointed, because there are going to be times in life where you work hard, you try, you're doing all these things and it still doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But I really think that like we need to be people who have the heart posture, and it really is a heart posture, of choosing to be celebratory of other people who don't just pretend to be good. And I think ultimately what this really is saying, and what this tells me about who God is, and I preached for the first time at church the other week, which was terrifying.
I'm sure you were great.
But one of what I spoke about in my message was actually about bringing God the mess.
Yeah.
And I think even though this verse doesn't maybe lean itself to that initially, God doesn't want us to be people who pretend and bring this false faith, false, perfect picture to the surface. He actually wants us to come vulnerable. And so if you need to have a moment with the Lord of being like, God, I'm really disappointed that I can't afford a house. God, I'm really struggling that people who I'm working just as hard as are further ahead as me. It's actually really healthy and good and godly to actually not pretend and fake it till you make it, like you said, but to be people who bring it to God, because dishonesty and jealousy and gossip are actually going to crumble you. Whereas if you give the power of those things to the Lord, if you surrender them to God, it actually takes the power away from it.
Absolutely. I want to come back to something that you said just before about one of the big things that young people want these days, and that's community. I feel like I want to take it a step further. I feel like, and this is true for my kids, that sure, they want that community, but they want acceptance within that community. And so often they feel like they have to become something that they're not to be able to collect that acceptance from that community. Because it's the number one thing that they strive for. They just want to feel like they fit and that they belong. And for some reason, we have these lies, we have these little voices in our head that tell us the way that we are authentically, truly, in our mess and in our goodness is not enough to be accepted. And that's a lie that we need to stop telling ourselves right now. We need to be able to get a hold, and this is one of the things that this verse teaches me about God's character, is that he cares about who you really are. Because we're not just trying to pretend to be good, trying to pretend what we think is going to collect that
we think other people want to hear.
That's right. We're not just going to say and do the things that, this is just what it's going to take to fit in. But God cares about who you really are, not who you're trying to be. He wants you to be you. He has a plan and a purpose for you, living your life the way that you should, not the way that you think you need to act to be able to get that acceptance from the world. We're ultimately here to be led by God in who we are, not by the community.
I love that thought, Cam, because when we know that God knows our heart, and when we actually understand that, like, there is no thought that we can have, there is no heart posture that we can have that God isn't already aware of, we actually can't hide from God. Sometimes I think we can. Sometimes we think we can, if we say the right thing or keep serving or keep doing, which I'm not going to lie, sometimes that does help change your heart posture when you keep pressing in and pushing in. But I think exactly what you said, let's not be people who just say things for the sake of pleasing people. And also, maybe you're listening right now and you have something that you know doesn't align with this. And to be totally honest, there will be a lot of us. Like I shared before, I've gone through times recently where I've had to go, I can sense that slight jealousy or slight disappointment coming up. And, I would just encourage you, take those things to God. It's so easy just to push it down or push it to the side and not actually deal with it, but actually to go, God, I'm going to bring you this mess. I'm going to bring you who I actually am, the emotions I'm actually feeling, and I'm going to lay it at your feet. And it's not always going to be an instantaneous, fixed, feeling great, not jealous, not disappointed. But what it actually does is it starts to get you to rely on God. And like we said earlier in this week, start to be thankful for the things that he's doing for you. You know, start to pray, be like, Lord, help shift my heart. Help me to not be jealous. Help me to not talk to people behind their backs. And slowly what you will find is the more you allow God to speak into your life, the more that you surrender that mess to God, you'll notice that the Holy Spirit will speak to you.
Yes.
You'll hear those little promptings of being like, oh my goodness, I shouldn't have done that or said that or thought that. And you'll notice it so quickly.
Yeah. Can I just share with you a quick little funny
Please
story?
do.
The very end of this verse, it says, you know, be done with talking about others behind their backs. I want to take you back to high school.
Okay.
And for the purpose of the illustration, I'm going to call this teacher Mr. Johnston.
Okay.
Okay. So there's a group of us that are just having a laugh just outside one of the portable classrooms. And we were laughing about Mr. Johnston's pants because for some reason on this particular day, he decided to wear, and they were outrageous. And this was in the 90s, right? So there was a
outrageous
lot of
times 5.
Exactly. And there were lots of colours, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I verbally said, because this is what the community was doing, we were having a go. And I said, I would never be caught dead in those pants. Mr. Johnston looks so ridiculous. Wouldn't you know, Mr. Johnston is walking down the stairs right behind me and hears everything.
Goodness.
Can I tell you, in that moment, your heart just sinks because you realize how harmful those words coming out of your mouth actually
Completely.
are. And you realize, now, Mr. Johnston was great. He had a laugh. Everybody had a good old time. But maybe it wouldn't have turned out that way. Maybe it's a different scenario and you're gossiping behind someone else's back and you're slandering and you're just spreading negativity about some particular person. Would you want them to hear those words?
Yeah.
Because I can tell you how I felt when Mr. Johnston heard the things that I didn't want him to hear. And I guarantee if you just let that sink in, it'll impact the way that you talk to other people. Being like, and it comes back to that authenticity and that integrity that we spoke about at the start of the podcast. Of just going, this is how we need to operate. This is how we need to be as a human being in our actions, in our conversations, in the way that we just are and interact with other people. We're not just trying to pretend to be good or saying the right thing or what the community or the group thinks that we should be saying because we're having a laugh at Mr. Johnston's pants, but rather we're being authentic. We're being true to ourselves and true to who God has called us to be.
So good, Cam. I hope you enjoyed listening to today's episode, and if you did, why don't you go give us a 5-star written review? I cannot wait to dive even deeper into the Word of God with you.